Members in the audience, welcome to the Education and Instruction Subcommittee on Tuesday, February 21st, 2023. We'll call this committee to order. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Representative Chisholm, Representative Glenn, Representative Hakeem, Representative Hicks, Representative Johnson, Representative Leatherwood, Representative McCalman, Chairlady Moody, Representative Reagan, Representative Raper, Representative Warner, Representative White, Chairman Sapiki.
Here.
Chairman, you have a quorum.
Members, are there any personal orders before we begin? All right, we do have two presentations today. We will get to those accordingly, and I'll talk about those later. But first, we have three bills up we need to dispose of. First up is House Bill 691 by Representative Parkinson. I have a motion? Motion is second. You are in proposition. You have an amendment, sir?
Yes, sir, I do.
Drafting codes 4154.
That is it, yes, sir.
Members, this makes the bill, correct?
Yes, sir, it does.
Members, we need to adopt this bill. Do I have a motion? Second? Okay. Without objection, we'll go ahead and put this on the bill. Okay, you're in the proper position. Go ahead and talk about your amendment, your bill.
Thank you, sir. And last week we wrote this bill. We wanted to tighten it up a little bit. Thank you to Chairman Reagan for his questions of defining data science. And I'll read, just what the bill does, or what the amendment does, which actually makes the bill. Beginning with the next adoption of academic standards in mathematics, the Standards Recommendation Committee shall include academic standards for a course in data science for students in any of the grades 9 through 12. In the committee's final recommendations, the State Board, pursuant to Subdivision C1, as used in this Subdivision C2, data science means, and Chairman Reagan, thank you for your question. This is the answer to it. Data science means the use of mathematics, machine learning, computer science, statistical research, data processing, and domain knowledge to extract meaningful insights from data. And with that, Mr. Chair, move passage.
Members, any questions for our bill sponsor? Go ahead, Chairman Raper. Chairman Raper, yep.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. One question, with all due respect. Number one, this sounds like a good idea as far as a course is concerned, and I have no problem at all as far as this being an elective course. My question is this. I'm a former math teacher in high school, and I was just wondering how this aligns with the state standards in mathematics, this coursework. So,
Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the legislation, the State School Board will make sure that it's aligned when they review the standards again.
Representative Raper, any further? Chairman's privilege here a little bit, ladies and gentlemen. We normally don't tell the State Board of Education what they accept for requirements for graduation. We leave that up to their decision. Last year, we passed a bill that changed the appointing authority of the State Board, represented by now this General Assembly 2/3. So 2/3 of that General Assembly will act at the direction of the General Assembly. 1/3 of that is appointed by the governor now. Members, we are kind of in uncharted territory here. I think this is something that we probably need to study more before we engage in this, and so I'd entertain a motion for summer study. Motion for summer study. Do I have a second? All those in favor of sending House Bill 691 to summer study, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. You're in summer study, sir.
Thank you for the heads up of summer study, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Next up is House Bill 98 by Representative Hardaway. Patience. Do I have a motion? Motion. Do I have a second? Representative Hart on House Bill 98, correct? Motion and a second. Representative Hardaway, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you. And good afternoon, Chairman, committee members. Even though I'm happy to be here, it's kind of a bittersweet moment. The bill before you deals with developing a curriculum for K-12 to develop conflict resolution skills. Those tools will allow our children to be able to deal with the situations where they find themselves in conflict without violence. You've seen this bill before. You saw this bill last year. And the only difference in this year and last year is that this bill will be known as the Representative Barbara Ward Cooper Act. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll take whatever questions, and I ask for passage.
Motions, do we have any questions for the bill sponsor? Chairman White.
Thank you, Chairman. Is there any framework for this? I know you and I have talked about this before. What is the framework you're talking about? We're talking about K through 12. But if such a bill like this were to pass, requires each local LEA, so what is the framework for getting it done? The language is not, that language is not in this bill, though, is it?
No, sir. We did not want to get into the detailed operations of each of the LEAs. We want them to have the freedom to work with the department and with any other entity to develop what works best for their students in their areas.
Chairman White.
Thank you. That's my question. I just concerns me, and I have my name on it, but it concerns me if a lot of times we ask them to require, like we've required our third graders to learn cursive writing, and it's not happening.
No, I did not do that, sir.
And so we got to be careful what we're doing. So
Yeah.
But good concept. But
And if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
The lasting effects for teaching our children how to stay out of violent acts, that in itself is going to pay off in the long run, and not in just dollars, but lives. And I'll leave it right there.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I can tell you that I recognize the value of this legislation. I worked with the behavior disorder kids, what a lot would call the bad kids, and we had a very strict policy of dealing with issues and conflicts and having group meetings when we need to have them in the classroom. It made all the difference in resolving conflict in the classroom between the students. And there are just some simple things that it worked in a classroom like mine, but it would work in any classroom in any school. And that's the thing that's so great about having something like this. If you address this at the beginning of the year and work on some team building, trust building activities with your students, and the students learn a little bit about each other, you will have so fewer problems arise, and behavior problems and that sort of things. If kids kind of know where each other's coming from, they build a little trust together, they're much less likely to get into conflict. And so having training like this, and especially at the beginning of the class as you're starting the year with your kids, this can be a game changer in how often your kids are on task, which will make sure that your kids succeed that year in all the skills that they need. This can be a game changer when it's done correctly. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but one of the salutes that the governor gave out during his State of the State address was to the Whitehaven principal, who has employed such a similar type program, and that's in Memphis, Shelby County. And he was here, I believe, before your committee, that Ms. Barbara Cooper brought him up for testimony, and you got to hear from him last year. And with passage, I'll be happy to bring him back for the full committee if you see fit.
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative, my concern here is twofold. One obvious question is, what state standard is this supporting?
Representative.
Can you be a little clearer in your question, sir?
The state school board promulgates standards for our curriculum and our learning. So is this addressed to any particular standard?
Representative.
This bill doesn't speak to that. If the state school board sees fit, then of course they'll set the standards. The only thing that we suggest is that it be age appropriate and grade appropriate.
Chairman Reagan?
Follow up. Thank you for that, and I agree with you there. And furthermore, I agree that the approach has some value and validity. The concern that was raised to me by some teachers, quite honestly, and in fact was reinforced again in an earlier hearing before our other education committee earlier today, was about the amount of time that we take teachers away from their primary duty. So I would ask you, how is this going to be implemented without doing that?
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would suggest, sir, that if you look at the time away from instruction that's caused by misbehavior, that's caused by fights and arguments, et cetera, when you look at that time away from the instruction and the interference with the ability of the teacher to offer instruction to the rest of the class, this bill is a time saver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions, sir.
Chairman Raper?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You may have answered this before, but I'm going back to the parameters just a little bit. Is there a time mandate, like a minimum or a maximum amount of time that they should do this per day, per weekly, monthly, yearly? I know I'm going back to the parameters again. You answered Mr. White about that, but I was just trying to get a little more concrete as far as what is actually being asked of each school.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the answer is no. We don't have a time mandate, and we don't force details upon the LEAs. We ask them to use their experiences, their expertise, their skill sets to make this program happen. And they're in a better position to develop the best possible product than we would be trying to do a cookie cutter, one-fits-all type from the state level.
Representative Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, well, first, let me thank you for bringing up Whitehaven High School and the principal who all stay in District 85. So thank you for that shout out. But my question is, will the LEAs build the framework for this? Or would each LEA build their own different program for this?
And the answer is yes.
Thank you.
Members, I understand the premise behind this bill. I really do. Conflict resolution. I've had numerous conversations with teachers that are worried about this bill, that it could supersede their authority in the classroom, especially at the early grade levels, where sometimes you have to have immediate resolution to a problem with our students. There is a possibility here that this could interfere with TISA funding on an earmark in TISA, which we've been very, very careful of not putting any earmarks in TISA, giving wide latitude to our locals on how they're going to allocate the money for the education of their students. Last year I had to visit the Whitehaven myself, and one of the things that I saw was most creative was the autonomy that they had to handle it at the local level without the interference from the state. Handle it their way, the way they want to do it. And I think that's what's most important here. And with those things being cautious, I would entertain a motion for summer study. Motion. Second, all those in favor of sending House Bill 98 to summer study, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Ayes have it. You'll be a summer study, sir.
All right, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Will this be a legitimate summer study? And will I be invited to present?
That would be up to the Speaker of the House. He's the one that sets summer study for us. What's going to be taken up?
Thank you, committee,
Thank you.
for your time.
Next up, we have House Bill 782 at the request of the sponsor be rolled for 2 weeks. That happen? All right, we are to our presentations. First up, we have, now members, once again, latitude going back and forth. right? We'll try to be productive here. We will take notes on what's said here and get those to you and get to all the committees, trying to exchange these ideas back and forth. First up, we have Tennessee Tech University. We have Natalie Beach, and we have Amber Spears. If you'll come up and take a seat, introduce yourselves to us. And since we only have 2 sponsors, we'll give you 6 minutes, okay? And then be ready to take questions, all right? Okay. There's a little button up there. It looks like somebody's speaking. Make sure you press that and your red light comes on. And then pull the microphones down.
Okay. Are we good?
You sound good.
Okay.
Yes? Okay. Go ahead.
Sounds good. Thank you all for having us here today. My name is Natalie Beach, and I am a new lecturer at Tennessee Tech. I'm new because last year I was teaching kindergartners how to read. I have just jumped out of K-12 schools for the last 18 years, and so I'm coming to you as a former teacher and as a mother of 3 children, including a current 3rd grader.
My name is Amber Spears. I'm an associate professor at Tennessee Tech University, and I teach literacy methods courses to pre-service teachers. Prior to that, I was a 1st grade teacher for 4 years, and I am the mother of a 7th grader, a 5th grader, and a 4th grader. So as educators and parents of young children, we can all agree that we are faced with growing challenges as we think about the best approaches to supporting young children in classrooms who all have individualized learning needs. We believe that there are more risks than benefits as we consider retention of children at any grade level. Applying this universal rule of retention has the potential to magnify those effects on as many as half of our 3rd graders each year. So better understanding the population of children that we're serving will not only help us better understand what we can do to support these students, but also what we can do to help them become successful. So we also understand that some children enter school at a disadvantage as they come in because of experiences that impacted them prior to kindergarten entry. And although that when children experience some forms of stress, that can be a normal part of healthy brain development, chronic exposure to stress negatively impacts typical brain development. Some studies have shown that adverse childhood experiences are associated with poor academic skills, including below average language and literacy skills, as well as poor emergent literacy skills. The findings in these types of studies underscore the importance of integrated approaches for addressing the multifaceted developmental needs of vulnerable young children.
So when we take that population of children and we look at them just like Dr. Cash from Bradley County and her team brought to you earlier, we look at the same normal curve that they showed you, but I want to add one more piece to that. So we know that 60th to 65th percentile is the mark that we need in order to pass TCAP. What I want to show you on the left side of this graph is where we're serving kids for RTI, and that starts at the 25th percentile. What you see in the middle is a big gap. Those are children that we know are not likely to pass TCAP, and we are doing no intervention to prevent such. They are having the same interventions that we would call Tier 1 for everyone, but have no additional interventions provided for them in that middle space. So then we move on to another piece that's important for my special ed background, and that is the idea of a specific learning disability and how in this 3rd grade retention law we're not retaining children with IEPs. What I would like to contend today is that we have many children with specific learning disabilities who do not yet know it by the end of their 3rd grade year. This is a graph that shows us, a table that shows us the years that children are identified as having a learning disability. You'll see there that top line is where our 3rd graders live, but they're not being identified until the end of elementary school, sometimes the beginning of middle school, for lots of different reasons. But what we're seeing here is we're saying, on paper, we're not retaining children with disabilities. What's happening is we are retaining children with disabilities who just don't know that they have one yet. So what do we do about that?
So the act or practice of academic redshirting is basically delaying kindergarten entry for 1 year. And some families adopt this principle for one of 2 reasons. One, to allow their child to more socially mature in that additional year, or to mitigate some of those increasing academic expectations prior to that kindergarten entry year. So children who enter kindergarten after just turning 5, let's say in the June, July, or August months, are more likely to struggle academically and or socially in the kindergarten year. So as such, we recommend revisiting birth date guidelines to also help consider exceptions to also allow children additional opportunities to attend voluntary pre-K programs, even if they have not already attended pre-K or if they have a summer birthday. Although sweeping change is what we need, we cannot expect that change to happen overnight. We must acknowledge that this change will be made one student at a time with one adult at a time. To that end, we recommend the following personnel supports be increased within the schools. 1, additional trained and certified teachers to serve as interventionists in the RTI process. Second, additional school psychologists would help us have the potential to support early identification and support of children with developmental delays. The third would be additional special education staff who would allow more children to be served within their least restrictive environments. And finally, the addition of more general education teachers would allow for smaller class sizes. Smaller class sizes would allow for teachers to provide earlier, more targeted, and individualized interventions for the students in their classrooms.
So we're saying a huge piece of what we think needs to happen is more grown-ups, right? We know that more grown-ups make more impact on people. But one piece that we're seeing, particularly in this early childhood elementary age here, is not that we're missing teachers, that we don't have enough teachers. What we're seeing, particularly on this piece here, is not that there's a hole we can't find the teachers. It's that we're not finding those highly qualified teachers. We, as an EPP program, are bringing all kinds of individuals in, and we are turning them into some rock star teachers, but not all of them are the rock stars that we hope that they are when we send them out. We want to be able to turn out high quality instructors. In order to do that, I think we're going to have to revisit how we recruit, how we retain, and how we train people. The department has done a great job with Reading 360 with a lot of the trainings that we've looked at with early literacy, but we still have a long way to go to get high quality people to want to be teachers. Right now, teaching is kind of a second plan for a lot of people. What can we do to make teaching the first plan? What can we make teaching something that they want to do because it's rewarding, because they know that they're going to get something out of it and be able to impact people? So we've got a lot of solutions that we hope that we can at least have you start to think about, and we would love to answer any questions you may have.
I owe you Representative Johnson, so you're first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess one of the things that really got me, I've talked to so many K1 and 2 teachers, and what I always hear almost every time I hear a story from them, I remember the year I had 15 kids in class. Every kid came out successful in both reading and math. And so that just hit me so hard, that smaller class size, because that is the answer, quite frankly. No matter what we're teaching or how we're teaching it, but really having the time to spend with each of those kiddos and get them ready. And that's why I think it's critical in K1 and 2, especially in our priority schools, that we limit that, put a really serious cap at 15 on that class size so that every kid gets the individual time that they need, and they will come out successful as long as they're getting that help as they go. You're not going to cram that into 4 weeks in the summer. That's helpful sometimes, but if you want them to get it, have a class size that a teacher knows she can get to every kid and make sure that they all have exactly what they need when they leave that grade. So thank you for adding that.
Can I add something to that? Yes, I absolutely agree. Something I want to point out in the research is sometimes we have people who say, well, in the research, class size doesn't matter because a good teacher can teach 40 kids as well as a good teacher can teach 15. And in a lot of ways, that's true, that a successful teacher is going to teach 40 children successful, but an unsuccessful teacher is going to teach 40 children unsuccessfully, as well as teach 10 children unsuccessfully. So I think we need to be careful when we look at research, because sometimes we think that it's anecdotal, that we say class size matters, but in the research it doesn't. I think what the research is telling us is that it all depends on the effectiveness of the instructor in the classroom.
And it also depends a lot on the resource that the child's family has.
Yes.
I mean, that is critical. When we're talking about kids who may not have the background and the resources, and their families may not, they're going to need that extra help very often. That's very clear in the data. And so making sure that in those areas, we are really serving those kids what they need. Thank you.
Question for you. What influence on a teacher has if you've got a classroom of 25 children where all 25 are on grade level, or you have another classroom where half the grade level is 1 or 2 grade levels behind? How does that affect your ability as a teacher?
Thank you. There are lots of reasons why it affects things. We obviously, anytime you have to divide your attention in lots of ways, that's difficult. I will tell you that with RTI, that has become much more manageable for a classroom teacher. So I think RTI was definitely a move in the right direction. What our goal right now, the way that schools are set up, is that that classroom teacher is in charge of that core instruction, and then we leave that remediation into those RTI times. With that said, dividing your time, anytime you don't have everyone on level, that's going to be difficult. Even when I do have everyone on level, and I've had years like that, where where my bottom kid was on grade level, I still probably have a 2-year span of who I'm teaching. I have an on-level kid at the bottom, but I have a 2 years ahead kid at the top that I'm also trying to grow. So the gap exists either way, and we have to troubleshoot that. I think RTI has made great gains and helped teachers able to manage some of those pieces. But yes, if everyone on grade level, but people are people, and so it's really hard to get everybody in one place. It's hard to make people all fit the same box.
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to get some points of clarification here, if I could, please. You mentioned interventions or the lack of them, but it's already been brought out. The law itself requires or offers learning camps as well as tutoring and retesting. Can you explain why those are not going to be effective in terms of bringing those children up to grade level?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So part of it is that we have children who, by the end of 3rd grade, have been in school for 4 years. And so we have kids who are up to 4 years behind. And so a summer or grade level, a camp for 8 weeks, or even tutoring for a year will probably not make that 2 to 4 years growth. Also, we have a huge problem, particularly in places with high poverty, with transportation, with parent buy-in, and with the ability to get kids where they're supposed to be in a timely manner and ready to learn.
Let me interject real quick, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman. You said students showing up that are possibly 4 grade levels behind after they've been in our system for 4 years. Why would an LEA promote that student?
A lot of those children are identified with special needs, and so they're still in our classrooms, and they're still required to take TCAP, but you could very well have a child who's reading on a kindergarten level in a 4th grade classroom.
Outside of special needs?
You would hopefully not. If you did, they would be being served by the RTI program in that 25th percentile and below.
So why would they, if they're being served by the RTI in 1st grade or kindergarten, why would they be showing up 2 and 3 and 4 grade levels behind? Wouldn't they be remediated by then?
You would hope that that's what RTI is doing. If they're making growth in RTI, then LEAs are making decisions differently about what that looks like.
Does growth equal proficiency?
It doesn't.
Thank you. Go ahead, Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I want to, you had mentioned funding, but the new funding formula, the TISA formula, authorizes an additional $300 per child for 3rd grade literacy work there. So are you saying that's not enough?
Go ahead.
So I am not part of the funding piece, and I don't know how LEAs are spending that money, so I don't know that I would be able to answer that, how LEAs are spending that money and where that's going.
Follow up, please.
Go ahead.
Perhaps I misunderstood you or misheard you. Did you not say you needed more funding there when you were talking about for additional personnel and so forth? So if you need more funding, but you're getting more funding, and you just said you don't know how they're going to spend it. I'm confused. Please clarify.
Okay, so the classroom or the schools that I am working in and the schools that I have worked in the past have the same number of people working in them now as they did 5 years ago. And so if that money went somewhere for people, that has not been realized in the experiences that we have had.
Well, that money is to be distributed in this coming year with the implementation of TISA.
Okay.
But I'm again, forgive me, I'm somewhat confused here. RTI is an intervention in itself.
That's correct.
And so you're saying, if I understood you correctly, that a certain number of hours spread throughout the year is not going to be the equivalent of a concentrated, 4 or 6 week program in the summer. How is that possible? I mean, it's the same number of hours, potentially.
So when we think about children, particularly those with learning disabilities identified or not, but even children who struggle to read, smashing all that into a short amount of time does not make the same amount of growth as if we were to let them practice across a larger amount of time. So we're talking about a 36-week school year versus a 6-week summer camp or learning program. So you just think about a sponge being saturated. There's only so much they can saturate within a 6-week time that we know that they would be able to take on more across a 36-week span when we're teaching them that way.
Okay. Final follow-up, please, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
All right, I've heard you mention a number of times special needs and or IEP needs or whatever. I earned my living as a statistician for a while, so if we're talking about the percentiles down there below the 3rd standard deviation or even below the 2nd standard deviation, and using that as an example for why we shouldn't apply standards to those that are above that, I'm confused. Can you clarify that, please? With basic numbers is what I'm talking about.
Sure, yeah, sure. So when we're talking about profound needs, we're talking probably about the 2nd or 3rd percentile, but we have upwards of 15 to 17% of our students with IEPs. So we're talking about a much bigger section of children. Also, when I'm talking about learning disabilities, they may or may not be identified by the time they're in the 2nd grade, and so those things will continue to happen. I understand that there are other kids that we're trying to serve as well in that middle ground that are not covered, but sometimes those kids are also in that middle ground that are not covered.
Can I come back to you? Representative Keene.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ladies, for being with us. A couple of questions, if I could, please. Well, this is one question, A and B. Who determines if a child has a learning disability? And I don't know if this is in your wheelhouse, but I'm aware of a child whose family has been told they need to be on, I don't know what the drug is they give. And we're talking about it in kindergarten. Mm-hmm. And how does that play into the learning of a child, dealing with that?
Okay, thank you. So this is happening both in the medical and the educational field, this concept of wait and see. Right? So we have medical professionals who are also saying, well, we know that this might be a problem, but let's wait and see what that looks like. And we have other medical professionals who say, no, we need to find the problem and solve it now. And so this is a concept that people go back and forth on regularly with ADHD medication, with learning disabilities, all of those pieces. We have another disability category that we call developmental delay before they get to reading age, so that if we see things developmentally that we can intervene with. A learning disability is typically part of a team decision with a school psychologist and is dependent on that RTI progress. So we're looking at their RTI progress and their intervention. And many times we have children who continue to progress in intervention, so the interventions are in effect working, and so then we don't get to see that there is a significant problem until those interventions stop working, which is kind of that wait and see approach that sometimes we also see in the medical field.
Okay, and the second question, in regards to teachers, recruiting, retaining, from your observation, what has been perceived as the rewards that potential teachers are looking for that at this time we're not providing to those potential teachers?
Do you have an idea on that one?
Well, I can answer the first part. I think a lot of people go into education not because of the salary. That's very clear to them. I think that they go into it with the belief system that they can make a difference in the lives of children. They either have had positive school experiences themselves, or B, they didn't have a positive school experience and they want to make change for future generations. I think sometimes we hear from new teachers it's very overwhelming and there's a lot of burnout in those early years. There are rigorous expectations, and we want high expectations for our teachers. And so I hear a lot of times these new teachers want extra supports in the classrooms when they are working with children with diverse learning needs. And I think that is one thing that could possibly support those new teachers is extra support in the classroom.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you. Let me expand on recruiting real quick for you. You talked about in your presentation about looking at other majors, students that are in other majors. Give us an idea of what you look for, not only in an individual to be a teacher, but what kind of corresponding majors that people could be in that we'd be looking at to maybe try to sway them to become teachers.
One major that we see at our university that people sort of navigate back and forth in between is a nursing major. So nursing majors and College of Education students are oftentimes connected and will leave one to go to the other. And I think overall what we see from those candidates are people who are compassionate for humanity, who care deeply about people, and like I mentioned before, want to make a difference in the lives of young people.
Would the change that the Governor Lee is proposing, going from a base salary of $38,000, starting pay to $50,000, how is that going to be a good enough recruiting tool to start to sway people to say, hey, let's give another look at education?
I certainly think it will absolutely grab some attention for those people who want to be working and full-time and raising families if they choose. I think that certainly would help sway them. If they were determining if they wanted to be a nurse or a teacher and they knew the salary compensation would be comparable, I think at that time that they could truly go with the profession that they wanted to pursue.
May I add to that?
Go ahead.
I also think that something that we see in teachers, particularly very successful teachers, is a little bit of resentment for people who might not be doing the best job. And so if we can continue to recruit high-quality people, which sometimes money will do, we can let go of some of our people that we need right now because we don't have enough, and we can really look for quality. And that's a piece of teacher morale that we can also improve, is when everybody's on the same ability level and working together, and that's not necessarily happening right now in schools.
Chairman White.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I like what you're saying, and I do agree with you. I've thought about this more than anything else for the past year. So where we are right now, and you've already said this, but I want you to repeat it, make sure I've got it down. We're in danger right now of trying to fix the 8-year-old, the third grader. So we've got this third grade retention. Everybody's focused on third grade retention. And I want to steer us away from that because we got to fix that, the 8-year-old. But I don't think we'll ever fix the 8-year-old if we don't go back in K1 and 2, which is what you're talking about, right?
Yes.
So that's where we need to focus our attention. So you mentioned several things a while ago. If you were king of the world, and what would you do in kindergarten, first and second grade, so we don't continue to have this discussion of holding back an 8-year-old? Can you give me a couple of points? And you mentioned some a while ago, but this is important right now.
I can. I know you can too. Can we both answer this one?
Do you want to think about that for a second before you answer?
I don't think so. I think
right.
I've had years to think
Have
about
at
it,
it.
if
Go
that's
ahead.
okay with you.
Go ahead.
I think a huge piece of it is we cannot wait and see. We've got to get to it as soon as we see it, and that's going to take people. It is very, very difficult to instruct pre-K, kindergarten, and first graders in groups of 20 when they are on different levels, and they're coming to us from their homes on different levels because they're coming from different homes. And so we've got to make sure that we are meeting them where they are, And that, even in kindergarten, could be a 2 or 3 year span. I have an almost 3-year-old who knows as many letters as a couple of kindergartners that I had just a few years ago. So those things happen in real life, and we have to be able to meet them where they are and take them further. And if we had the people, we really have great programming. We don't need more books or programs or things like that. It's just the people to touch the people is the hugest piece that we have. If we can get in there without a wait and see approach and really make some big interventions from the beginning to mitigate maybe some of the experiences that children have not had before their pre-K or kindergarten years, we can get into a lot of pieces before we get to that 8-year-old mark.
Go ahead.
So if you're principal of a school where they have this TISA money coming, which is student-centered, and there's $500 extra per every elementary school child, I think that was the figure in there, plus other resources, student-centered, would you concentrate on, and possibly, the people part is tough right now, you know, and looking for it, you know, we got to kickstart this. And so would you, as a principal, like, okay, I'm going to reduce my K-1-2 classes down to 15 and try to find extra support in there? And then we'll save money in the back end because I won't be retaining these third graders and things. Is that, go ahead.
Yes, that's the hope. I do want to throw a caveat out there or make you aware of something that's happening in some schools that does worry me a little bit, because we do want people. But what we have heard is we have principals who are making decisions between a certified staff member who you're paying full-time pay and benefits for, so I can get one 7-hour certified staff member, or I can get 4 5-hour assistants for the same amount. So I'm getting 7 hours of work out of one certified high-quality person, or I can get 20 hours of work out of people who might be high quality but not quite as educated or highly qualified for the job that they're doing. Does that make sense? So yes, I would love to see smaller class sizes, or to even see 2 grown-ups in a room with the class sizes that we currently have. But I would also want to throw out there that we would want those to be quality people, that bodies are not necessarily the solution, but high quality bodies are the solution.
Yeah, and that's our challenge, isn't it?
It
right
is.
now?
It is. I'm sorry I didn't let you finish.
No, I just to add on, learning to read is not an innate process. And so knowing how to teach reading effectively to young children, especially for those coming into school with traumatic experiences, it takes a very specialized expertise to be able to connect with and teach effectively those young children. And so I don't want that to be compromised as we consider adding those additional staff members in the building.
Go ahead.
If you were going to hold a child back at any time, K-1, 2, 3, when would it be?
This is hard for me. There's just no research that says holding a kid back is the way to do it. If I had to do it, I'd want to do it as young as possible, but there are only a few really good reasons to do it. I want to catch them before that, if at all possible.
Okay.
What logistically with our classes right now, if you shrink them to 15, you need space. So across the state, I can see every superintendent and every school board member, every county commissioner going, uh-oh, we're going to have to build more schools, right? If this General Assembly moves on this, would it be more effective is if you had a certified teacher and a high-quality teacher's assistant, right? Could not the EPP providers fill that need for because you said your goal is to turn out high-quality teachers. One of the things that we need is classroom experience, so they're prepared for the classroom. If we created funding for the EPPs to be able to pay these interns, whatever you want to call them, to go into these early education classrooms and leave the same classroom there with the same amount of kids, but like you said, had 2 adults in the classroom, one of them is learning to become a teacher and using the practical applications of being in the classroom with a high-quality teacher. Would that get us, in your opinion, to where we need to be in early ed?
I think it sounds great on paper. The piece for EPPs would be figuring out how we would do that with coursework and all the other pieces that go with that. But on paper, that sounds like something that we would love to see for our students, and we would love to see for our K-12 students, and we would also love to see for our college students. It would be figuring out the coursework and the rest of those pieces that might not logistically work out quite the way that we would want them to.
Is it possible?
I think if we worked it into their residency year, their senior year, I think it would absolutely be plausible. I think it would also be a draw for recruitment for more universities to attract new teachers to come into their programs as well. So I do think it is a plausible solution.
So if the legislation was directive into early ed K1 and 2, and the stipend or the salary would be created through the General Assembly to provide these senior year students their residency, so to speak, that would be directed there, could we even go further and direct it into Title I schools? They have the most kids that are at risk. Would there be a benefit to those teachers, those new teachers, going into that environment being challenged at the highest level?
Absolutely. The district that we are in, the county that our university is in, the majority of all the elementary schools that our students are placed in are Title I. So if for us in particular, it would be a natural partnership.
Chairman Reagan will give you the last follow-up, and then we're going to have to move on to the next presenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, my concern, as I expressed earlier, is we seem to be focusing our attention on a very small segment of our student population. The concern for them, don't misunderstand me, I understand your concerns and agree that we should address that. But when you say you shouldn't hold a student back, you've categorically made that something that implies that we have to catch them up some other way. And yet you've said, if I understood you correctly, the summer learning camps and the tutoring, which takes place the whole next year, are not going to do that. So I haven't heard you put forward a better alternative, as it were. You've mentioned RTI. We already have RTI. And if RTI were working, I don't think we would have 66% of our third grade matriculating students not reading on grade level. So RTI apparently is not filling the bill. If we add more teachers, as you have suggested, and you've also pointed out, we're talking about a huge increase in cost to do that, as well as the fact that we don't have enough teachers to fill the billets that we have open now. Again, I'm questioning about numbers. Tell me about numbers. If we have one standard deviation that we need to treat especially, then we have the remainder of our student population that can go forward, and if they need to be held back because they didn't get the training, then the alternatives that are offered, summer camps or tutoring or retesting if it was a bad day for them or whatever, you haven't explained why that wouldn't work.
Yes, sir. Okay, so there are a couple of things there. So RTI, you're right, is only serving those who are in the 25th percentile and below. So we've got 75% of kids. My concern is that middle, that 25th to 65th. Those are the kids who are not getting RTI right now. And so those are the kids that are kind of being left behind there. 50% of our kids are coming in with adverse childhood experiences. And so it is a bigger sect than just those kids with special needs, but for different reasons. So I think the tutoring and things like that could be successful if you could logistically get them there, but some of that's not happening. So the same thing with tutoring. If we're talking about tutoring all year and we're doing that outside of the school day, then we start to get logistically things that are difficult for families, and we're extending the school day of someone who's probably already been saturated in the last 7 hours. And so that's why those things are not on the top of our list of interventions. So the piece that we want to do is to, again, mitigate some of those experiences or the lack thereof in those early childhood years so that we would not have to do that when they're 8, when they're older. So if I can take these kids who have literally not been spoken to beyond what we call business talk, come here, do that, sit down, then I can have those language experiences with them because I have 2 grown-ups in the room to do that. those are the kinds of things that we're talking about with interventions that even beyond RTI are not currently happening, and that would go beyond that 25% of kids at the bottom. That would benefit also that middle section of that 25th to 65th percentile group that is not currently getting any support from the school system as is.
In the interest of time, I'll cease questioning. I think I could go on too long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies, thank you very much for your input here. I think you gave us some things to think about. I really appreciate that. Your slide presentation, if you'll send that to Ms. Wright, we'll make sure all the members get a copy of that, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Next up, Nathan James and helpers from the State Board of Education. We asked them to come in to talk about standards, how they're created, how our standards stack up with other states, the rigor, et cetera, to give us a better working knowledge of this. One of the things we hear from our teachers is we have too many standards, not grade level appropriate. So they're here to tell us how that whole thing gets created and how it winds up at the local level. If you introduce yourself for everybody on the record, go ahead. We'll give you about 6 minutes, and then you'll have the rest of the time for questions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. Sarah Morrison, Executive Director for the State Board of Education, affectionately known as Nathan James Helper. I like that one. I'm going to use that one. Thank you,
Yeah,
Chairman.
I'm not in trouble or anything there, Mr. Chairman.
And I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves.
Michael Derline, Deputy Executive Director of Policy and Research with the State Board. Thank you.
Nathan James, Deputy Executive Director for Legislative and External Affairs.
We really appreciate the opportunity to be here today and share with you a little bit more about the very rigorous and comprehensive process undertaken in the state of Tennessee to review core academic standards, so thinking about math, language arts, science, and social studies. We'll share first an overview of the process generally across those 4 academic areas, and then spend a little time going into the details of the current social studies standards review, which is happening right now. Please stop us, obviously, at any time with questions, or certainly at the end as well. Along with partners in the General Assembly, our partners at the Department of Education, the Governor's Office, and local districts, at the State Board, we're focused on student success above all else. And as the policymaking body for K-12 education in Tennessee, the State Board has a broad set of responsibilities, from determining what should be in each grade and subject in terms of what a student needs to know and be able to do, which is the topic for today, to approving educator preparation programs, to setting teacher licensure requirements. This also means faithfully following the law and making the best rules we can for K-12 education in Tennessee. You'll see here the board's work is situated between the decisions made by lawmakers like yourselves and the implementation and oversight responsibilities led by the Department of Education. Through ongoing engagement with districts and stakeholders, there's also a feedback loop which helps inform policy changes over time. Today, as I mentioned, we're going to spend a little time delving into one big area of responsibility for the State Board, which is setting instructional standards. These standards drive decisions made by the Textbook and Instructional Materials Commission, as well as professional development for educators and student assessments across the state, which is managed by the Department of Education. You'll see here on this slide, again, the 4 kind of governmental agencies that have some responsibility for setting standards and instructional materials decisions. So I mentioned the State Board. Our primary responsibility is to facilitate the review of academic standards and core content areas. Then our board adopts those standards and approves the instructional materials, that list coming to us from the Quality Commission below. And then we also manage the instructional materials waiver process, so for any district that wants something off the list that's been approved for the Textbook and Instructional Materials Commission. As I mentioned, the Department of Education develops guidance and professional development to support districts in implementation of these standards. They also ensure that the assessments that students take, the TCAP, are aligned to the approved instructional standards. The Textbook and Instructional Materials Commission, as I mentioned, are the ones that are looking at these textbooks and bringing to the State Board for approval a list of materials aligned with the standards. And then school districts are obviously responsible for the implementation of these standards through the curriculum choices that they make at the local level. So now to go into a little bit more detail about the State Board's role in particular with instructional standards. If you can keep going. This is the TCA statute 49-131 through 314 that sets out a very clear process for what students should know and be able to do, or the process that we should go through to determine that goal. And as the law requires, it's one of the most, if not the most, transparent and inclusive standards setting processes in the country. As you'll see in the next couple slides, every step along the way is open to the public, involves tens of thousands of Tennesseans, and has multiple opportunities for all who wish to be involved in having their opinions known in these decisions about what students should be able to do and know at the end of a course or subject. The review process is comprehensive, it's thorough. As I mentioned, it involves all stakeholders at multiple stages in the review cycle. From the first to the second round of public feedback, Tennesseans get multiple opportunities to weigh in on the individual standards that make up what we want students to know and be able to do at any grade or any subject in Tennessee. Educator teams, that second arrow there, are consisting of teachers of the subject matter that's under review, paired with higher education professors of the related subjects to consider the reviews and comments from the public in making their suggested revisions to the standards. After the first round of public feedback, that set of revisions is again made available for public review. Additional changes are often made before going to what we refer to as the Standards Recommendation Committee, or another acronym, SRC. The SRC consists of 4 appointees of the governor, 3 from the lieutenant governor, and 3 from the Speaker of the House, all subject to legislative confirmation. This group reviews and discusses the draft standards after the second review cycle, or public review, and sends a final set of their recommendations to the State Board of Education for approval. All of their meetings are also noticed and open to the public. The Standards Recommendation Committee meetings are also live streamed.
Quick question for you.
Yes.
Go back to the previous slide. The Educator Advisory Team, who appoints those members?
Yes, and actually, if we go to the next slide, I will go into a little bit more detail on that group.
Okay.
That is a decision that's made by the State Board of Education using recommendations from districts, from the Department of Education. We really aspire to get the best educators from across the state and get a regional representation of educators so that we really are drawing from all ends when we compile those lists of educators.
So it's the State Board's decision?
It is a State Board decision, yeah. So you'll see there, again, to the chairman's question, those educator advisory teams are made up of 7 educators, again, a mix of K-12 and higher ed, who represent each grade band and are using the public feedback from that first round of survey to make their experience in the classroom, we're looking at them as experts as well, to inform the decisions that get made before the second round of public feedback. The Standards Development Committee is a subset of those educators, and they are using across grade levels to ensure that we have vertical alignment. So not only just in their individual grade bands, but looking across the standards to ensure from K through 12 that, for example, in social studies, as we'll see in a minute, that there's vertical alignment as well across these standards as they're being revised. We're currently using Scantron as our vendor to post those standards for public review. They're the ones that do that public survey and also provide to these educator teams and to the state board, pretty detailed analyses of the public feedback. And after that process is when the standards recommendation, as I mentioned, who is a group of legislatively and gubernatorially appointed members, comes together for the final review before these standards come before the state board for their approval. So as you can see, it is an involved process, and as my colleague to my right, Michael Derline, will show you specifically in the example of social studies, it takes a while to get through that process because there are so many steps. So there are no surprises, I hope, by the end of the line in standards review.
Thanks, Sarah. So we have a few slides just to kind of talk through the current timeline for social studies standards review. In June of 2022, we released our first public feedback survey. It was open for 4 weeks, and we received over 114,000 comments. That's actually the most comments we've ever received on a public feedback survey to date. In July, we opened that application for the educator advisory teams, and out of 60 applicants, we selected 21 individuals. They are representative of East, Middle, and West Tennessee, rural, urban, suburban districts, charter, traditional public schools. Those teams then met in September to draft revisions to the standards based on applicable laws, public feedback, and their own professional expertise. Just this past October, that Standards Development Committee that Sarah spoke about, which is that subset of the Educator Advisory Team, they met to further refine the proposed standards for vertical alignment. This February, so next week, we will release our second public feedback survey. It'll be open for 4 weeks, so from February 27th through March 26th. And then this spring and summer, we'll bring that Standards Recommendation Committee together to finalize revisions based on that public feedback and submit to the State Board for approval. Looking ahead to a year from now, February 2024, the standards will be on final reading with the State Board. And then in the 2025-26 academic year, the Textbook Commission will review materials and determine which materials will be recommended for approval. Districts will then begin adopting and purchasing materials. And then in 26-27, districts will begin implementation of those new standards using approved materials. Under the current 6-year cycle, that means that the social studies standards would be under review again in the summer of 2028. So again, just to reiterate, lots of steps in the process, lots of opportunities for stakeholder engagement, and public feedback plays a significant role in this process. I'm going to pass it over to Nathan.
And I'll also be happy to share with you or send out the press release that we'll do when we open up the next round of public feedback so that you can share that with your constituents or put it on your websites or whatever. Obviously, we'd like to get as many folks involved as possible. There are a great many legal requirements, especially for social studies. As you may have guessed, there's a lot of your colleagues that social studies is their favorite topic, and over the course of time, Title 49 has gotten an awful lot of very specific laws about what needs to be taught in social studies. And I'm pleased to tell you that even the first time that we did this revision, it was made crystal clear to everyone all along the way that we were going to make certain that each and every single requirement from the General Assembly and every portion of this Title 49 would be incorporated in those standards. If you were to look at these social studies standards now, you would actually see a cross-reference with a legal chart that shows you the precise TCA requirement for them when there is one. So that's one thing that there's no deviation on. The civics test requirement, the no promotion of religion. Standards must include black culture and history, a list of primary sources that cannot be prohibited, celebrate Freedom Week, requirements of Tennessee history courses, the Governor's Civic Seal, the Prohibited Concepts Act, the U.S. history course, and the U.S. and Tennessee constitutions are required to be taught. The same attention to detail that we gave last time will be given this time as well. These are our information on the public feedback period, which we've gone over with you. And as I've said, I'm happy to share it out so you can share it with your constituents. And at this point in time, we'll be happy to take questions.
First of all, Nathan, if you'll make sure you'll send that about TCA code, all the requirements. If you'll send it to Ms. Wright, we'll make sure that gets distributed to everybody so we can all have a working knowledge of what is through legislative edict that's going to be in the social studies standards, okay?
Happy to do that, sir.
Question I have for you is, you said that waivers. I thought this General Assembly took action on waivers that on going forward, textbook waivers would not be allowed in state.
There are still some exceptions to that in terms of allowable waivers with current lists. So it is certainly something that we're wrestling with and would love to continue to confer on because it does create a very clunky process that's outside of the adopted materials. But yes, there are still some exceptions where districts can apply for waivers from the state board.
So wouldn't that be contradictory to state law?
I wish we had our lawyer here. No, I mean, we've been very clear to stay within the confines of what's required in law. So no, these are allowable under state law.
And the other question I have is, talking to teachers around the state, and I've talked to Mr. James about this ad nauseum, that the standards are basically, the standards are being compiled. I'm losing my voice today, so you gotta bear with me.
Okay.
The standards are being compiled based off of feedback from the 100,000 people that come in there. And it seems like for some reason, in our teachers' minds at the district level, that when the standards reviews come back, we have more standards than we did the year before. Who determines what's the right amount of standards? And that's the magical question is, what makes the cut, what doesn't make the cut, to where someone says, you know what, in a 180-day school year, they just don't have enough time. So how do you flesh that out?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, that is really at the heart of what these educator teams are wrestling with along the way. And those are subject matter experts who are in the classroom currently. And so we're looking to them. You know, I'm a former English teacher, so I can have, some working knowledge of what should be in English, but it's been a while since I've been in the classroom. I mean, we really are relying on these educators to help us as a state figure out what's the right amount of standards, what are the kind of the most important standards, if you will, And then all of that becomes real, I would say, in terms of the instructional materials and the assessment decisions. So I think it's something we have to continue to look at and work with these educators on. And certainly that's part of why we have the multiple rounds of public feedback, because part of what you can say during those surveys is too many standards or this one's redundant. I mean, people can go in there in whatever detail beyond the educator teams and leave that kind of feedback to say, this feels redundant or this is too much. So I think it's an open question, but one that we have to continue to wrestle with and look to our educators to help solve.
And I would also chime in on that. Ultimately, the number of standards is decided by the Standards Recommendation Committee, which has 6 of its 10 members appointed by the legislative branch, and all of which are subject to confirmation. They sit as public officials in their own right, uncompensated, just like State Board of Education members, but public officials in their own right. And that process, and it's, I was sitting here thinking about it because I think I've got Chairman Reagan, Chairman White, and Chairman Moody were the members who were present and when this process was put into statute. And the concept was to make certain that the people with that very decision-making ability were independent and were charged individually with this process, and frankly, that a majority of them were appointed by the legislative branch. So from a legal standpoint, the ultimate answer to that is the standards recommendation committees that are appointed by 6 by the speakers and 4 by the governor and confirmed by this General Assembly.
So to expand on that, though, when we went through the last standards recommendation committee, I believe for mathematics, there were direct questions to the standards review committee members that we were appointing.
Right.
Do you believe there's too many standards? And I can show you the video. The answer was yes.
And Mr. Chairman, I would say in conversation with some of those members, and I'll again also make the invitation, anybody that wants to come to any of their meetings and be part of that, you're certainly more than welcome. The conversation that some of those members had with me about that, because I did not forget those conversations, was that some of the standards that existed, they weren't adding so much as they needed to reposition parts of them in different places. And you're right, the number of mathematics standards did increase. After all of them had told you, they didn't think that the number actually needed to go up. But in their best judgment as public officials in their own right, they did make that decision. So,
I would just...
Chairman Moody?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll let whoever wants to answer this, but just thinking about the over 114,000 comments, the legalese stuff, who helps you do that? Is it all on you? Is the Department of Ed or something I'm missing? How do you handle all of that?
In terms of compiling the feedback?
Yes.
Well, that's again where Scantron as our vendor really does put that into very digestible, or is as digestible as possible with 114,000 comments. We'll see what that looks like this round. Like I said, that's a record. But that's really something that we rely on the vendor to help put into a format that our educator teams can use.
And the legal questions, all that, like that, putting that code, all that.
Oh,
put
that
together
is
as-
more from our team. Yeah, I mean, our general counsel has job security along with her fellow lawyers, because that's something that we put together for them and then walk through as part of their training, the educators, when they're coming together.
I was just going to add, I just started with the board back in July after being with the department for about 9.5 years, and it was really impressive to see those teams come together, and that training they get really on the front end of the process is pretty substantive, and Scantron provides a whole lot of information about that public feedback that is digestible, as Sarah said, and they do take that into consideration pretty seriously.
Thank you.
If you want it. You're good? Chairman White?
Yeah, just for clarity, could you back up 2 slides? One more. Under the current bottom, under the current 6-year cycle, so we've got a piece of legislation moving through, it moves to 8 years. Would that change that, or is that already in place, or would it be modified to meet the 8-year?
This would push it to 2030.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing that up, Chairman, too. And you'll see that's the reason for that bill, too, is that by the time you get through this process, what our educators have been saying across the state is there's not enough time for them to actually implement the standards before we're back and reviewing them again. So I think giving some time for them to play out in implementation is only fair. And, it's something we've learned over time that an 8-year cycle is probably more advantageous.
Just out of curiosity, are any states that are more than 8 years that are performing at a high level?
Let me get back to you on that because
you
that's,
would.
that's something
Okay,
to look at.
That's fine. Any other questions? Well, I appreciate you coming in and clearing that up for us. I'm sure if you have any questions, we'll be able to track you down. It's not a problem. Nathan, you always do a good job. You're always hanging around when we need you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members.
Members, that's going to conclude our presentations today. I want to let you know that in Chairman Moody's committee next week, we have the Pearson vendor coming in about testing. So start preparing your questions for them next week. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn. We are adjourned.